Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. I want to just first of all thank all of you for joining this seminar. Education is such an important topic, and it is the cornerstone of our democracy. It is the place where we can hopefully eradicate generational poverty, and we are facing so many crises right now. I am Bacardi Jackson. I am a managing attorney for the Miami office and senior supervising attorney for children's rights for the Southern Poverty Law Center. And so this is my heart and passion, and I'm so excited to be here today with these amazing, amazing panelists. As I was mentioning, and as we even got into in some of the power panel, you know, education is sort of a war zone right now. Even here sitting in Florida, we are the 45th in the whole nation in terms of per pupil spending. We're about 4,000 below what the national average is on what we spend on children. We are looking across the whole region, about 1 in 5 of our children in public education is living below the poverty line. More than half of the children in our public school systems are low income. 1 in 3 are Black. And so we are in a place where we are seeing education segregated. It's segregation then, segregation now. Let's hope it is not always, but we have a whole bunch of schemes that are happening to keep it that way as much as possible. So we have work to do. As we were talking about downstairs, we are seeing right now the attack on curriculum. And it's not just labeled CRT, but the language they're using is inclusive and culturally responsive curriculum. They're even calling the math publication authors and publishers to say it should not reference inclusive and culturally responsive materials. There's the pandemic that's looming, causing all kinds of learning loss that we know is going to take years for us to dig out. We are seeing growing learning gaps, largely between rich and poor, between Black and white. And we are seeing the polarization of public safety that is putting our children's lives at risk. So there is a lot of doom and gloom, and I brought you all down so I could lift you up and tell you we're not here to talk about that. We are here to talk about and celebrate. It's what we do as Black folks all the time, right in the middle of the daunting and the impossible. We celebrate, and we are able to pull out what is happening right, and that's what these good folks here are going to talk about. And so I'm going to kick it to each of them, and we'll get into some of the other stuff too maybe, and if you have questions we can certainly get to that. But why don't we start with you, Ms. Baker, and I'm not going to give full intros. I'm going to kick it to you all to give us more background. But I will say, and I think we need some applause here, we are talking about a 49-year educator, Ms. Baker. And she is, even after 49 years, not done. She is a warrior, still on the front lines for elementary, middle, and high school students. Would you talk to us, Ms. Baker, about what you are doing even now to deal with academic excellence and dropout prevention, and how you are supporting our students, and what we can be doing to support you in that work?
Thank you. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for having me. I'm very elated to be here. Actually, I am retired, but once an educator, always an educator. And so, yes, I am very much still involved in the community. The director of the program, which I'm going to talk about, which is Mentoring Tomorrow's Leaders, MTL. Our director of equity and diversity is here, Mr. David Watkins at the school board, who now funds the program, is here to also assist. So I'm not really in the program right now, but I'm still guest speaker and et cetera for the program, and still working in the community very much. But MTL is Mentoring Tomorrow's Leaders. It is an academic intervention, dropout prevention, mentoring program, especially peer-to-peer mentoring. We founded the program back in early 2007 and 8, and then of course the school board heard about the program, decided to write a grant with the Obama administration, the U.S. Department of Education, And the School Board of Broward County received $4.5 million to fund the program for 5 years. The two pilot schools were Boyd Anderson and Plantation High School. After the 5 years, now the school district funds the program. So even though it started with 2 schools, it now has approximately 43 schools. And it's not just high schools, it's elementary, middle, and high. And so it is a program that is designed to help with the dropout rate. Matter of fact, the dropout rate for those 2 pilot schools was in the high 70s. Now it's in 96 percentile. So it is working. So despite all the gloom and doom, it was even more gloom and doom back in 2007 and 8, which is when we founded the program. So it has, the program itself has been very successful. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that and what's going on with MTL. Okay?
Thank you so much. And
Sure.
next to Ms. Baker is Dr. Katsia Cadeau, and she is also a career educator at both the K through 12 and post-secondary education levels. So would you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about how you are bridging the gap between those systems, between K through 12 and higher ed?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Katsia Cadeau, and I've been a professor for 16 years at St. Thomas University. I am proud to say that I am the first Black African-American woman to become a full professor with tenured status. It took a lot of work, mainly research, and I've taught for 10 years in elementary and in high school, but I decided after taking the Philly, which is the Florida Leadership exam, I decided to go into higher ed because I felt like I needed to help new teachers. There were too many new teachers that were leaving after the first day. So I decided, I said, you know, most of the professors are just researchers. I want to come in and really know what it was to really walk the walk. And that's what I did. I went into higher ed and I did research, and at the same time I bridged the gap. I wrote an article about bridging the gap between middle school and college. How do we have to start before high school. So what we did, we brought students in at the university for a couple months, and then we followed them throughout the years. And we went into the inner city schools. I took my student teachers into the inner city at my church, Lively Stone Church of Miami, and we tutored English language learners, students who were low developmentally, who had learning disabilities. And I was training teachers, and we were helping the community. That's how I was able to bridge the gap. And I'll tell you a little bit more later.
Thank you so much. The man next to Dr. Cadeau probably doesn't need an introduction to many folks in this room. We have President Gregory Hill, who is leading Broward College, one of the beacons in our community. So would you talk to us, Gregory Hill, about give us a little bit of your background, because your story is always amazing to hear, but also tell us how you are eliminating barriers and bringing education into our communities where it is needed.
Thank you very much for the very kind intro, Bacardi. It's a pleasure to be here. Great to see good old friends. I haven't seen you in such a long time, Sheena, so it's such a pleasure. And for those who are not from South Florida or Broward County, welcome. So my name is Greg Hill, and as Bacardi mentioned, I have the absolute privilege of serving as the president of Broward College, which is the sole public higher education institution that is based in Broward County. It is one of our larger institutions in the nation with about 60,000 students. And I ended up in this role effectively on July 1st of 2018 from a fairly circuitous position. Started my career as a corporate litigator, and you know, was one of these litigators who did a lot like others in the community and really focused on what kind of difference that I could make. And I remember trying to think about if there was one thing that I could do, that I could dedicate my life to, where I thought that I could make the greatest difference. I landed on higher education. And like many of us, when we decide these things, they're grounded in our own experiences. And one of the experiences, and I have many that speak to this moment that I'm existing in, but among the experiences that tend to be most striking in my recollection is just simply when I was growing up as a kid. I did not have the pleasure of growing up in South Florida. I grew up in South Jamaica, Queens, New York, in the 80s and 90s at a very difficult time during the height of the crack epidemic, and had bars on every window of my home and had bullets come through my living room window and lost friends both to the left and right of my home. And so my mother did something that was wise and brave, and she essentially lied about my address so I could go to school in a better neighborhood. And so starting in the 3rd grade, I would go through the projects, get on the bus for about 45 minutes, and then get off the bus, walk for another 10 minutes before I was getting to my elementary school. And this was an elementary school in a far more affluent area than I lived in. And it was 1989 when I was graduating from elementary school in the 6th grade. And I said to a friend who was from this more affluent area, I said, "Isn't this amazing? We're going to be the last class of the decade." And he, without any hesitation at all, said, "No, we're going to be the last class of the millennium because we're going to graduate college in 1999. And this was the first time that I had ever heard the word college. And so here I was, a 6th grader, hearing the word college for the first time from another 6th grader who knew exactly what year he was going to graduate. And that is the chasm that I'm reminded of every single day when I think about the work we do at Broward College to open access, to eliminate the chasm, to make sure that no one is learning by luck what college is, that no one is hearing it for the first time in the 6th grade. And so we've been engaging in work that I'm very proud of at the institution to bridge that chasm. And I look forward to talking to you a little bit more about that later on as well.
Thank you so much, President Hill. And he's modest, so he's not telling you. He's also a trailblazer and the first Black president of Broward College. So very proud of him. Next to President Hill is Donnie Hill, different spelling, no relation, Dr. Donnie Hill, who is the Executive Director for Outreach and Academic Programs at Florida Memorial University. And I was really excited about having Dr. Hill join us because he has such great depth of knowledge about community schools, which I don't think a lot of people know about. So would you please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, but then also just tell us what is a community school?
Great, thank you. And again, thank you, Bacardi, and thank you, panel, for allowing me to join. But I think just excited about participating. And really, I think about the idea of community schools. And again, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, but I think about the idea of community schools first is about how to help students and families participate. And I'm originally from Stockton, California, and my parents always said how to help more people to be engaged, how to think about how to help the local parents see that they have a voice and a vision, but even more to think about people's dignity. And so for me, I think about community schools as a place that we bring people together to use schools as a hub. And so again, Donnie Hill from Stockton, California, by way of Donnie and Deborah Hill, that are just two people that wanted to serve. And so community schools are that place where people come together to serve a common good. Using schools as a place where we, in America, hopefully in the world, will come to, but even more a place where we can think about healthcare, where we can think about housing, transportation, even more wellness. And so community school is that place where people can come together for a common good, but even more a place where we can coordinate services. So often, as Ms. Baker talked about the other day, was that there's all these incredible programs happening, but so often they're not working together. And so the one thing that I recognize, again, coming from my parents, is that you don't always have to create more, you don't have to duplicate, but how do you multiply by bringing people together? And so community school is that thing, that idea that's either a virtual or either, to be more specific, it's that idea where we come together for a common good around elementary, middle, and high school, but create a pathway to post-secondary education and opportunities. And so again, I'm looking forward to talking about that more later.
So let's just jump right in and talk about why you're doing what you're doing. We're here to talk about, what are the best practices and what's working. So, give us some information about what successes you're seeing and, why you're going down this pathway. I know you already talked about, Ms. Baker, about the graduation rates improving to 96%, which is incredible. Tell us, how does that happen? What are you seeing that's right? What are the best practices? Why is mentoring and peer-to-peer work important?
Well, one of the things that I notice as an educator is that, well, two things actually. Students listen to other students more so than they do the adults. And so at that time, I was teaching high-level seniors, and they knew that I was, had been in negotiation or talking about a program like MTL. Initially, it was called African American Male Student Achievement, because just as we have the data today, back then it was even worse for our African American males. And so after sitting in many faculty meetings and listening to the demographics and how black males were always the one that had the lowest graduation rate, highest dropout rate, et cetera. And then I wanted to do something about it. It's like Laura Coates said today, start from where you are, what you have, and go with it, right? And so I just wanted to be a part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so that's how it all began. But what happened was those students agreed to help me get started with mentoring the 9th and 10th graders, and juniors and seniors mentor, and that's how the program works in a study hall after school situation. The high schools, a lot of them use personalization, which is a study hall, but even at elementary and middle, they use a after school program where they can actually work with the students, with a coordinator or an academic coach, mentoring the students, as well as having peer-to-peer mentoring. So there are 5 tenets of the program. It's academic excellence, it's the mentoring, it's the community involvement, and so we involve them in anything that's positive that's going on in the community. It's parental involvement, because you always have to have the parents involved, and so you also provide workshops for them as well as incentives. We take the kids on college tours and all kind of other incentives and field trips to keep them involved. And so as a result, we start to see the students begin to really take an interest, especially those 9th and 10th graders who were struggling, an interest in their learning, in their behavior. There is a pledge that they have. There is an oath that they take, that they are going to improve through this program. And so that's exactly what happened. I found as an educator that every student has a story. We just have to learn their story. We just have to find out what's going on. So MTL believes in educating the whole child. And so by getting involved in that particular child's situation and understanding what's the situation at home and what they're going through, you can reach all children. And so that's what works, okay? When you let that child know that you really care about them. And so with MTL, it became a camaraderie where students, and Mr. Watkins is wearing the uniform. Stand up, Mr. Watkins, and show them our uniform. They actually get to wear a uniform. When we took them to Tallahassee, the legislators, the day at the Capitol, Broward County Day at the Capitol, everyone stopped. Who are those young men? Who are those young ladies? Because you can see that somehow or another they are different. And so there was a pride, there is a pride in them when they begin to succeed, and they want to do well. So all children can succeed. We just have to find out what works for them.
And this program went from just 2 pilot schools, and now you're in
43.
43. And are there any plans to expand this even more, Mr. Watkins?
Yes, we are always working to continue to expand the program, because we believe that having students connected and engaged is how we keep them on the right track. And so from elementary school through college, we want to ensure that every child has advocacy, has an advocate that can speak on their behalf, that can support them. And that's what we believe this program does for our children.
Oh, that is so critical, making sure that every child has that touch point that every child should be born with. And it's just incredible to see that work. And I'm going to jump over to you, Dr. Hill, because it's very similar when you're talking about the whole child, the whole family involving the parent. Can you tie into that and talk
Yes.
about what successes you've seen and how that fits with the work you're doing?
So community schools have been around for about 100 years. And so many of us have grown up in a community where schools were obviously important. Our parents were engaged and involved. But the thing about community schools that is more deliberate now is there's about 10,000 taking place right now across the country. Now, really the 4 points that we look at in community schools are: one, collaborative leadership, is making sure that stakeholders are involved. So we're talking about parents, principals, pastors, local lay people that are involved in the school. Two, we're looking at the idea of integrated student supports. So we recognize that social emotional learning is important, but we're also bringing in wraparound services that are really dealing with the whole child, whole family, whole community. Third, we're looking at family and community engagement. We recognize that families are important, but even more is that can we use schools as a hub that can either do training, can be opportunities that we can extend the day, and then lastly, thinking about this idea of expanded learning. We know that school is more than just a 7 to 3. We are thinking about school as all year long, and even more, how do we use the weekends? And so the idea of, as Mr. Watkins and Ms. Baker talk about, is that we have to shift from using just programs to using more of a practice base where we're bringing in more services. And then we're connecting the dots and making sure that all kids are served. And again, as we think about an elementary through a high school, is even more, can we connect the feeder pattern so that elementary, middle, and high school are connected, and then there's a pathway to a Broward College, or there's a pathway to a Florida Memorial, or a pathway to a FIU, or whatever school that they may be interested in. But the idea is to make sure that things are connected and that they're not dropped off, so that there's a pass off, but then again, we are wrapping around the whole child and whole family.
And I got a chance to visit a school in Orlando, and I mean, it was mind-blowing because you walk in and you walk down the hall, and the first thing you see is an office where you can get mental health services.
Yes.
And then the next door was an office where you can get job placement services. And then they were talking about restorative justice models and things like that. And the stats at this school were incredible.
Yes.
They hadn't had students who were, one of the phenomenons here in Florida is Baker Acted. They didn't have students who were Baker Acted. They weren't having students arrested. Can you just tell us, just give us more of a visual of what that looks like?
Yeah, so in our schools that we're working with in Orlando, you have a clinic on campus. You have social workers. You have mental health counselors. You have family resources. And so the idea is now it's a safe place for kids to come to, but even more the teachers are supported. So teachers are no longer feeling overwhelmed. They have now a partner that can support that child when that kid is having a challenging day. But then also when it comes to students that are experiencing homelessness and or food insecurity, is now there's a pantry in place so that family also feels that they're taken care of. And so again, you're wrapping around the whole family. And so what we've seen is an improvement in academic performance, behavior, as well as course performance, but we've also seen an increase in the college going rate. And so one thing that we always try to promote as well is dual enrollment as well. We want kids to have an experience where they can see themselves as college students in high school, so that's increasing that number. But the other thing I would talk about is Dr. Cadu talked about engaging the elementary and middle. If we engage kids earlier, now college is a reality. Again, as President Hill talked about, is that they're no longer thinking that that's for the kid down the street. They're beginning to see that that's for me too, because now I've seen an example and I've experienced the possibilities.
And we know this works, so why aren't there more community schools and is there an opportunity for there to be more?
Yes, so the excitement about community schools now is, so in prior years, there's about $30 million for community schools, federal funds. So in the Biden administration, there's $450 million that has been proposed to expand community schools. And so currently, again, there's about 10,000 community schools across our country. There's about 100 of them in the state of Florida. But with this expansion act, the idea is to increase that number, hopefully, tenfold. But again, there's a huge opportunity to expand community schools because they really are working, and it's a place-based strategy. It's no longer, as President Hill talked about, getting on the bus and going 45 minutes to an hour to go to school. It's about engaging our communities and building our communities from a place of development so that kids can live and learn in their place and then connect to all the incredible things taking place. Because you want to see kids seeing that their community as an asset, not a deficit. So community schools are asset-based.
And Dr. Cadeau, this kind of ties into what you were talking about as Dr. Hill was talking about, kids seeing themselves in college already. What kind of successes did you see in the program that you started? Can you talk to us a little bit more about the best practices there? Can this be duplicated? Tell us what you're seeing that's working.
I know it can be duplicated, but we need to get all stakeholders involved. Involved meaning the administrator, the school board member. I became a partner with Dr. Steve Gallen. The different partners, we have to get them to buy in. So I recall they had to pay school bus to bus the students, because it was in the inner city, to St. Thomas University. And our professors had agreed to teach the courses for free. And the students were excited. They took English and science, because one of my goals is to, I advocate teaching, because when I taught elementary school, I noticed that most of the elementary school teachers did not want to teach science. So our students, they didn't do too well on the exams in science. They weren't interested in the field of science. And so we had 2 professors teach science. The students were excited. They couldn't wait. I would go to the school. It was Westview Middle. And they were like, are we going to take any other classes? And I told the professors to relate to them. So one of the literature course that they were taking, it was, they were looking at rap music and dissecting it and looking into it and poetry. They enjoyed it. And the next year we did it, I would say over 80% of the students wanted to go to college. They said they wanted to go to college. I spoke to Mr. Butler. He said about 50% of them went to college. So it is a success. We have to continue it. I did not continue that program. We did other programs. We partnered and started a STEM program with a gentleman by the name of Ivan Yeager, who invented the robotic hand. He has a program called Technology Leaders Initiative. Now, we've been doing that for, I would say, 8 years, taking my students to the elementary and middle schools, training the teachers, because that's the other thing. We have to train the teachers. You can't tell them to teach something that they're not interested. Show them how to do it too. So my students went there, I went there, and now we have it online. But of course, they like that clutch, or they'll call me, Dr. Cadeau, are you coming? I'm like, it's online, And they're like, no, but we need you. The students are asking for you. Train them. And this program, it's called Technology Leaders Initiative, teaching students to become inventors themselves, to think critically. You just wouldn't believe what those students were able to do. We give them a pre-test and then a post-test, and then their invention. And then the teacher would pick the best invention, and we had an invention expo every year, and now it's growing. The things that the students invent, they would have their lab coats, they would come up, and I get excited when the black students win, because it's like, I'm like, yes, that was the roughest class. Wow, I can't believe they won. And I had one student who came, she cried, and she was the only person her parents brought her, because the rest of her teammates didn't have transportation to come to the expo. She came alone with her invention. She explained it. She did her little commercial. She had her business card. This program is phenomenal. I get excited talking about it, because to see how the students are so excited into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and thinking critically. So it has worked.
It's amazing when you can engage students and
Yes.
make the lessons relevant. And so
Yes.
that's just incredible to hear about. President Hill, a couple of things that Dr. Cadeau mentioned that kind of reminded me of some of the things that you're doing. One is a question of accessibility. And, you even talked about in your own personal story of the travel of, 45 minutes on a bus and 10 minutes to walk. And, the pandemic has actually presented some incredible opportunities as it relates to accessibility. So I'd love for you to talk about that. But the other thing that I'm really interested in, and I'd love for you to share with the audience, is this notion of stakeholders and why, why it's so much more effective when we can find the intersectionality between the interest of not only educators but also business leaders and government and community. So if you can address those couple of things, we'd love to share that with the audience.
Yeah, I'll actually start with the latter question first, because the answer to that question is really grounded in data that's been around for quite some time, which I don't think we pay close enough attention to. If you ever look up the Opportunity Atlas, I hope you spend a few minutes to do so at some point. The Opportunity Atlas was created by a friend. His name is Dr. Raj Chetty. Dr. Chetty is out of Harvard, but he's actually the youngest tenured economics professor in Harvard's 400-year history. And he created the Opportunity Atlas to help folks understand the importance of social and economic mobility, and how closely it is tied to where you live, this disparity and equity based on your geographic location. And if you look at that, you'll see, and he tells the story far better than I could, the income outcomes over one's lifetime are most determined by the zip code that they grow up in. Okay, where you were born, where you will live, has the greatest impact on your income outcomes over your lifetime. And so when we talk about institutions of higher education, when we talk about our nation, when we talk about political leadership, and the role that we play in helping everyone yield the greatest potential opportunities possible, we need to start looking at that. Another really important data that I always talk to my higher education colleagues about is the reality that 50 years ago, the bottom quartile of income earners had about 6% of their kids going to college, and the top quartile of income earners had about 40% of their kids going to college. You fast forward to today, the top quartile of income earners have gone from having 40% of their kids graduate from college to about 70% of their kids graduating from college. And if you look at the bottom income quartile, the bottom income quartile has gone from a mere 6% of their kids graduating from college to 9% of their kids graduating from college. Essentially inertia. And so when we think about the role of higher education institutions, we have to think about what are we doing to shift those numbers that have been stagnant for 50 years. And you tie it back to the other important reality that nearly every economist, not all because there's always one, but nearly every economist will tell you that your income outcomes over your lifetime are best leveraged by getting a higher education. You will also hear that it will increase the quality of your life over your lifetime. It also increases the length of your life. It also reduces the likelihood you'll end up on public assistance. It also reduces the likelihood that you will be without a job or without a job long. All of these things rest on the fulcrum of post-secondary opportunity. And so when we think about those stakeholders understanding that, right, particularly if you want to talk about tight labor markets and recognizing that people need the skills to optimize a corporate strategy, right? And that's something that may not appeal to their morality, but it appeals to their business and optimizing the resources, which we need that too. And so, of course, when we think about looking at our K-12 system and making sure the resources are there, that needs to continue to happen. But we also need to be thinking about, again, going into community, which I love the way that's resonating among my colleagues on this panel. When we talk about how we're going to adjust for that, come back to the Chetty data around how are we penetrating zip codes, right? How are we going into cities? How are we making it impossible? I have 2 daughters. You heard my story about how I learned about college. They will never remember when they learned about college. They'll never remember. And one thing that I remember, I live in a neighborhood now that's very different than the one I grew up in. And when I took my daughter, now my 9-year-old, but she was 6 at the time, to her first grade class on the first day of school, and we looked above the threshold on her doorway for class, we saw a banner showing a college. And we looked at every single threshold, and there was a different college above the threshold of every door for every first grader. That institution is making it impossible for our daughters and other children not to see that opportunity. So what is our role, right? When we go into communities and we say, we are not going to bounce in and out, we are going to live in this community. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing. One of the things, when I took the seat on July 1st of 2018, the first thing I asked my team to do is say, look, we're an open access institution. Our credits are $100 a credit. It is as affordable as you will get. It is as affordable as you will get. I want to know what our most challenged zip codes are, i.e. those with the highest unemployment rates, lowest post-secondary attainment rates, and tell me of our 60,000 students, how many folks are we drawing from these communities? We were drawing 3,000 students of 60,000 students in an open access institution, which I consider paltry. And so what we knew we needed to do was, why is that? Ask ourselves that and challenge ourselves, not be afraid to answer that question. We looked at where we were geographically. We have about 12 locations. We weren't even touching the communities that we needed to be in. We asked the people who needed to take 2 buses to take 2 buses. We asked the people without technology to find another way. We asked people who have children and working multiple jobs to somehow find the time to get to us. It is important to focus on cities, communities, zip codes, the power of proximity, being in community. They may not have the benefit, like I did not have the benefit of the dinner table conversation, but we can bring that conversation to the community and live there. So what we did was, we decided we would partner with our cities and partner with nonprofit organizations. We partnered with our library system. We said, you have space in the communities that need us most. There's a library in every city, every one of our 31 cities. In fact, there's 37 libraries. So now we're in our libraries. Guess what we're doing? We are providing post-secondary education, faculty in our libraries, in community, making it impossible for them not to see the opportunity. We're raising flags. And by the way, this was not my idea. I don't know if anyone here is from the city of West Park. City of West Park said, we want to raise a flag of Broward College because we want to know, we want our residents to know that college is of this community and it is for you. I don't know if Handy is represented in here, amazing organization. They said, let's put a mural of Broward College on our walls outside, making it impossible. And we idealize this by saying, how do we make it impossible for them not to see us between their home and the bus stop? In 3 years, we've added from 0 locations, 26 new locations in the heart of those same communities. And on top of the 3,000 we were saying, we added another 3,000 students now who have been able to go through Broward College programming. And we are just beginning, but the important part of this is that we are never leaving. Right? We are never leaving. It has not come to us the weekend so we can show you what it is. It is defying myths. It's recognizing, as we talked about earlier, when you knock on doors in community, first thing I did when I became president, I said, I want to go to Dorsey River Bend area, which is 33311 zip code, our most challenged zip code. Knocked on doors. I said, hey, I'm the new president of Broward College. I want you to think about it. I want you to tell your residents and tell your friends. A lot of them were very thankful I did that. Some of them said, I can't go to Broward College because I've been arrested before. I said, no, that's not true. One of them said, I can't go to Broward College because all I know how to do is fix motors. I said, no, we have an aviation program that could make you as successful as you could possibly imagine, right? But it's just important to have that presence, because if you don't have the presence, you can't bust the myths. If you don't have the presence, you can't get people engaged, just like my daughters, right? Recognizing the opportunities early on, making it impossible for them not to see it.
And that's so incredible, using the infrastructure we have to bring to people exactly what they need, which is also the same thing I think about the community schools model, is we have schools sitting in every single neighborhood in our country pretty much. And you could bring services right there instead of over-investing in police and policing our communities and putting our children in militarized systems. We could bring services right in this infrastructure that already exists. Want to just turn a little bit to our audience. We have one of the things I love about the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, and I've been doing this for 10 years now, is we have incredible speakers and panelists, but we have amazing audience members. If you could activate this incredible audience at the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, what is it you would activate them to do? Talk to us about what's happening right now that you would love to see this group of amazing leaders engage in terms of speaking to their communities or their colleagues and other leaders in their communities? So
I
who
would
wants to do
challenge,
that?
look, I think one of the things that we are doing is facing just the brutal truth, right? Exposing it. And I think, and Donnie and I, Dr. Hill and I were talking about this the other night, the importance of recognizing the reality, right? It's very easy to say, to just keep moving, doing the same things in the same direction and not shaking it up a little bit, right? But the truth is, one of the greatest fears that I have is 10, 20 years from now, having the same data points, right, to look at. And we can look wherever we're from, right? We see this, right? You know, it's funny, you grow up and, you know, you're a kid and you hear something for the first time and then you realize now, you know, you were 7, now you're 17, you're hearing it again, you're 27, you're hearing it again, all right? And in order to escape that, right, you have to be honest about the realities that you live in, and then you have to be willing to take the chance, right, to do the things that have the propensity to make a difference.
So if I may follow, I think, you know, thinking about what we were discussing, you know, making an investment into local communities. And so I think it's easy to want to go down the street to a different school. You know, the better schools are in the suburbs. But to make an investment into our local communities and thinking about really what can we bring to the table. You know, there's a lot of nonprofits in the community. Like, what can we do to invest in nonprofits? What can we do to invest in schools? How might we share our service or our business into a local school? And so asking people, you know, how might I volunteer, but being deliberate and intentional. I think it's important not to just go to a school and say, I have some money for you, but to say, I'm willing to invest, you know, for 1 to 3 years, but I want to do this with you. Or ask, what is your need and how might I bring people together to address your need? But also thinking about what will you do in 4 to 5 years to make sure that this isn't a continuous need. So having a level of accountability. But I think making an investment into a local community, creating accountability, but also making sure that we're deliberate and intentional about whatever we may choose to do.
Oh, that's so important. And you just touched on, you know, one of the things that's amazing about Florida is our voters put in our Constitution that every community, every child has a right to a free, high-quality education. You shouldn't have to go across town to get that. That should be a walking distance. Dr. Cadeau, looks like you're jumping in.
The pandemic has changed everything. How we teach, how children learn, how we learn as a community. And it opened our eyes. Okay, now it's not just brick and mortar. We have to train the teachers, teach them how to teach online, because this is the new normal. You know, a lot of schools are going solely online, a lot of programs. I have a program, elementary ed on ground at the university, and I started an online program. The on-ground program has been like 10 students per class. You know, it's just not growing. Because of the pandemic, I said, let's go online. Let's talk to the school board. Let's see if we can offer the teachers a discount. The other day, I had 30 students in my class, you know, and students from everywhere. So we need to now, not just in higher ed, but also elementary, to teach the elementary teachers. We have to transition that. So that's what I think is very important. Let's start looking how we can teach strategies and train teachers to teach online so students do not lose so much. So there's not too many learning loss that take place.
And we were talking about that in our conversation about there are some real advantages to being online. Students with disabilities not having to navigate certain systems,
Yes.
though some of the disabilities might make that harder. So we've got to think about that too. But certainly we need to take advantage of whatever this moment is and optimize it. Ms. Baker?
Yes, I know it's an old catchphrase, but get involved. Okay, I think I so much enjoyed Laura Coates' speech when she talked about the little girl at the beach. You may not have a child or a child, I think everyone in this room, though, is interested in education. That's why you're here. So you either have a child or you have your grandmother, grandfather, whomever, but you're interested in education. So you may not have an issue in the 3331 area or whatever, which is, you're right, Dr. Hale, it is the area that the Urban League mostly serves. And so our students in those areas are suffering. They're suffering. I did, even though I'm retired, I did a portion of the last few years during the pandemic online. And it was terrible for the students, mentally, okay? The school board started doing something called mindfulness with the students because they were just tuning out completely, especially in those areas, the 33311 area. So you may not have a child or know someone in that area, but through your church or whomever, or wherever, get involved and try to play a part in some child's life as a mentor. Or the department that MTL is in is called Student Services, okay? And the way I describe student services, and this is why MTL is under the auspice of that department, anything that a child needs, whether it's their attendance, their behavior, if they need clothing, if they are homeless, if they need child care, if the parent needs child care, if social work, psychology, all of those areas are right there at Lauderdale Manors, okay? That's where the office is, and that's why Dr. Thompson, who's retired now also, but that's why she brought that department to Lauderdale Manors in the community. So that way, anything, any service that a family may need, they can get it. And they don't have to go downtown to what we call Taj Mahal, right? The school board building. They can actually go right there in the community at Lauderdale Manors. So I say, try to touch a child's life by getting involved in that child. Yes, volunteer, but like the gentleman said, not just actually give money or give your time, but also reach out and see how you can help that child. Show them that there are services right there at Lauderdale Manors where they can get the help that they need. Talk to the high school students about Broward College. I'm so honored to be on the platform with Dr. Hale because I am always pushing Broward College. Okay, I taught high school for many years, and many of our seniors want to go away to college, but they can't afford it, or at least they think they can't afford it. So therefore, I always recommended Broward College because I know what great things they're doing at Broward College. So become a mentor. That's the advice that I would give.
Amen. Thank you for that. And the last couple of minutes we have, I just want to open it up if we have any questions from the audience.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to everyone on the panel. My name is H.Lee Tony, and I'm a former community college administrator at your sister institution, Miami Dade College. And so I have a couple questions, Dr. Hill. One, policy. What are your thoughts about the pending proposal for a free community college across the country? And philanthropic, what can you tell us about the impact of the Mackenzie Scott donation of Broward College? Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And what that means for your institution.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So I'm very supportive of the free community college program offered by President Biden, and actually hit a bit of a stumbling block in the Senate, although the House is moving still pretty aggressive with it. But we'll see. We'll see how it does. And so, but fundamentally, when I think about that proposal, one of the things is we continue to think about the most important folks, right, our audience members, and I say Broward College's audience, those who we seek to attract, those who seek to transform their lives and want to leverage higher education to do so. Oftentimes, before they will go online, before they will pick up the phone, the first thought is, that is not for me, that is for rich people. That is not something that I can afford. And as you mentioned earlier, if you're coming from I was a Pell Grant recipient, if you're coming from a low-income background, there are so many resources for you, but the reality is still the same, right? They come in thinking, I can't afford it, right? So how many people get stopped before they've even tried because they've decided they can't afford it? So if for no other reason, once we establish that there is no cost to this at a national level, I imagine that we will see an alleviation of a stress maybe it shouldn't exist, but it exists, right? And so that's a big part of it. Inevitably, we will see some folks who otherwise couldn't afford it be able to get this opportunity as well. So I think it's an important policy initiative. I'm glad. I think it's long overdue. I hope we get there. Thank you for kindly recognizing the Mackenzie Scott gift. For those who don't know, Mackenzie Scott has been incredibly generous over the last couple of years to acknowledge institutions of so many different types, including higher education, for some of the work that they're doing, and seek to provide funding to buttress that work. So when we started, what I described to you earlier is called Broward Up, and it really is a change of our business model. It is not about waiting for students to come to us in the difficult manners that it often takes, but to go into those communities that I've described and to go get those students, right, and to live in the communities with those students. Mackenzie Scott decided after learning about this work that we're doing that she would donate $30 million to us, and it's a really powerful moment for us, and I say for this community, because I mentioned earlier that this idea of bouncing in and out of communities, and it was the first thing when I told my board. So when I was seeking the presidency, and it's a very drawn out process, I told the board, we're a great institution, but we are not doing everything we should be doing, and we are not going to get the folks that we need to. So we've been doing that. It was a vision. With the Mackenzie Scott gift, to truly answer your question, she fortifies this to ensure that it persists forever, right? And there will be others. But this really takes a huge leap in fortifying it so that we can assure those communities that, again, college, post-secondary education, and attainment are of this community. It is of you, and there's no reason those opportunities shouldn't exist. So again, thank you very much for bringing that up.
I know we're quickly running out of time. Let's get our last question in.
I don't live in the state, so I want to say that. So my experience is just excited to hear what you're saying about how you're working with children and communities to change the trajectory of their lives. I think one of the questions that I have, and what I'm coming from my point of view from where I live, is that oftentimes we do this work in bringing these children and getting resources together, and we have educators who still teach from a dominant point of view. And I was wondering, what do you do, what are you doing as far as educators? I'm a social worker, and I have social workers who are still doing social work that box people in. What are you doing with educators to train them to really infuse social justice in what they're doing so that students aren't getting into the classroom and feeling defeated?
I'll jump in.
Oh, go ahead. Sure.
So in some of our prior work that we were doing when I was at FIU, and now we will begin to do some of that work at Florida Memorial, is that we were doing teaching institutes. And so in the summer, we had about $100,000 that we could really provide stipends for teachers in the summer to provide additional funding so that those teachers will go back to those particular communities. But we really talked about, one, social and emotional learning. We talked about teacher improvement and strategy, and then we also provided coaching during the academic year. So the idea is that students in particular zip codes would not be those students that had the quote-unquote bad teachers. They're with teachers that really cared but had a commitment, but we also made a financial commitment to them that as long as you continue to support, we would find a way to continue to support you, so we would support those students. But also when we thought about social work and education, there's an intersection. So often we keep them separate. And so recognizing that teachers needed support, students needed support, but also how do we work collectively together? And so we were really bridging some of that gap around social justice roundtables, so that we're bringing people together to talk about issues that impact the community, also issues that impact the classroom, but also ways of bringing the families together to address those issues as well.
And thank you so much for that. And just a quick reminder on that point is that this is an advocacy point that we need people paying attention to. Right now, there's a real attack on teachers. Teachers are literally being put on list, and their names are being revealed if they signed a pledge to teach truth. They are being attacked at the higher ed level, where they are being forced to have surveys about their political ideologies, threatening with our higher ed institutions with losing funding if they don't have a certain amount of conservative ideologies. I mean, we have seen teachers who are being walked out of the classroom because they said something controversial, and even students now can turn their teachers in, and even though we are a two-party consent state, now students can go in and record their teachers without their consent or knowledge to turn them in. So we are in an amazing moment, and that's not just happening in Florida, that's happening across our nation. So same thing. Same thing. So this is a long-term game, and we need people really, really focused on advocating in our legislature. I mean, we've got these amazing educators who are lifting it up in all of our communities in these places, but we've got to be on the ground standing with them as they do the things that our children need. So I hope you will join me in giving them a round of applause for all the positive things that are happening at their hands. Thank you so much.